It's a peculiar time to be a political philosopher who studies how we think about rights, when in the United States, so much of our rights talk is concerned with property rights, private property rights. And depending on who you talk to, the only reason, including Madison, the central purpose of government is securing private property. The issue with COVID-19 is that you have an entire disease that's laid waste to our political institution, but has left private property, for the most part, intact. Yet we have big political problems that have nothing to do with private property, or have very little to do with private property. How do we think ourselves through this? And what does it mean that our failure to think ourselves through this, what does it mean for our failure to think ourselves through this, for getting over what coronavirus has done to America? I'm going to go through a few moves. I'm going to talk about Hobbes. I'm going to talk about Locke. I'm going to talk about a little bit of Hegel, and then help you think through this problem for yourself. Hey, and we're going to do it after the beat.
To the beat, y'all.
Yeah. Sound good to me. Never change the ways for the world or the government. If I was the president, then I would state facts. You leave it up to me, I'll paint the White House black and ain't no future in your front.
So, social contract theory. We'll talk real quickly about Hobbes. For Hobbes, old, but still relevant insofar as he understood that as a matter of nature, if this was all just natural, we don't have rights to anything else, in anything external in the world. And nobody has a right to respect us. I should say it the opposite. We have a right to everything. We have a right to do everything, including of other people's body. We have a right to everything, and there's no legitimate claim on stopping us. Right? So we have a right. It's the world of the purge. Anyone can do anything they want to, and your property is pretty much what you can possess and kind of secure for as long as you can possess it and secure it. Right? Like I said, it's the philosophy of the purge. He says that's a horrible place to be. Life is nasty, Buddhist, and short. So the way to get around that is to surrender your rights to a sovereign, he liked monarchy, so kind of king, who would then, because you've surrendered your rights to them, secure your person and property. All right, so as a matter of self-preservation, the rational thing was to surrender your rights to a king who would then secure your person and your property at their discretion. They would decide all property conflicts. They would decide anything you could do externally, pretty much, right? And you did have a right to defend your body if they were coming to get you, the moment they were trying to get you. But outside of that, you pretty much don't have a right to even actually talk bad about the king. Like, for the security of the nation, we need you to behave a certain way. And we need you to surrender all of your rights to a king. And that way the king would then take care of all of the other person and property claims that would emerge in the polity. And it's okay because you voluntarily surrendered your rights to the king, because that would be the only way that would save you from the purge. Right? So that's Hobbes. Locke, it's a little bit softer. You do have rights insofar as you work on the land. You know, God created this land. We work on the land. When we work on the land, we make the land ours. The problem is that there still are property conflicts. So how do you get hold of these property conflicts? How do you kind of think through these property conflicts? Well, we need a civil government. So we all kind of agree to join in the civil government too that will negotiate our property conflicts. But the property is ours, even in the state of nature. Now, remember, for Hobbes, nothing is ours. There is no ours in the state of nature. Only what you can. That's not coronavirus. That's actually something going down the wrong throat. I just ate. Anyway, there is no ours. There is just what you can secure. For Locke, there is an ours. It's just ambiguous, and so we need a government that will negotiate property conflicts. All right, so good. The problem is that's a distorted view of the role of government and a distorted view of property, right? Because property is not, for Locke, property is, you work with something, you've improved it, you've made it yours, and through your labor, it's become yours. Not really. And even Hobbes knew that. Like, not really. Something is yours when other people recognize it as yours. That's what makes it yours. They see your will in it, and they'll say, that's his, not mine. That's what makes it yours. If other people don't recognize it, it doesn't really matter how much you work on it. It's still what other people recognize. That's what makes it property. That's what separates property from possession. A possession is what I can hold and secure. Property, I can walk away and it's still mine because other people recognize it as mine, which means property isn't between myself and the thing. Property is a relation between myself and other people. Right? And this is what Hegel and some other people actually understood very seriously, even kind of Rousseau. Property is a relation, and it's a very important relation between yourself and other people. They need to be able to recognize that thing as theirs. And that's how property can be sustained in a political world, right? Through recognition. And so that kind of gets you into other things that can be that kind of come into being through recognition, including institutional relations, right? So someone like Locke really either has retrograde Locke or Hobbes. But Hobbes has a problem with self-governance because he doesn't see the reason why it should be valued so much. Because if government's only role is to secure person and property being in relationship with the stuff, then why do you need Congress or legislatures or anything like that? Self-governance doesn't matter. It could actually just be confusing because you want the will of the sovereign to just kind of be suffused and absolute and unambiguous. So self-government for Hobbes is like, why bother? And for Locke, since it's all about property, you're still going to have huge problems with non-property issues. And right now, COVID-19 is a non-property issue. Nobody's worried about being mugged on the street. Nobody's worried about really burglars, but people are worried about, sustaining other aspects of freedom, which include their jobs and their marriages and their schools and their daycares and their, goods and services and the interconnecting market institutions that sustain our freedom. So if freedom is just about private property, COVID-19 wouldn't serve that much of a problem. However, freedom isn't just about private property, especially if private property is just a relationship between a person and their stuff. Freedom is about relationship between other people, and private property is just one aspect of that relationship between yourself and another person. It's a very important aspect of that relationship between yourself and another person. This is also why private property alone doesn't account for, how we treat bodies, right? So if your body was some sort of temple that nobody else could encroach upon, I couldn't make you take a vaccine. The thing is, I can make you take a vaccine. The reason I can make you take a vaccine is the reason that your body is quasi-sacred is because that is how you express your will, right? That is how you express your will. That is how you expect that you understand and you recognize blah, 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 blah. But it's not sacred because it's attached to you. It's only sacred because it expresses your will. So once you are able to express that you do not like vaccinations, mandatory vaccinations for COVID-19, then we take your expressions, we kind of run it through the political process, and as long as your expression has been duly recorded, once we mandate that you take the vaccine for COVID-19, then we tie you down and give you the vaccination for COVID-19. And that has not been a kind of abridgment of your bodily autonomy, because the reason you have bodily autonomy is for you to be able to express your will. That is the way your will gets into the world. Once your will gets into the world and is negotiated through the political process, then whatever the political process decides is kind of like what has been officially recognized. That way we can force you to take the vaccination, the COVID-19 vaccination, without it being oppressive. However, if there was something weird about the vaccination that afterwards you were stricken mute or you could no longer communicate, then forcing the vaccination would be a political problem, because if we can't get your will into the world, then it can't be a part of the self-determining government. So that's why, for example, you can't sell yourself into slavery, Because once you sell yourself into slavery, everything that you do isn't actually an expression of your will. It's an expression of your master's will. So we can never actually know what's you and what's your master. And as long as we can never actually know what's you and what's your master, then we can't account for you as an independent body that's self-determining in the government. So bodily autonomy matters insofar as it's an expression of your will, and your will as an individual needs to be expressed in the political process. It doesn't matter insofar as it just happens to be your body, right? This is why it's perfectly okay to draft people into a war, as long as a political system that has sanctioned the draft is a just one that enables other people to like register their dissent and participate in the process that came up with the adjudication of like, this is the appropriate war in order to draft people. Right. So I hope I've clarified. So if you have a notion of property, that property is just your relationship between yourself and stuff, like not yourself and other people. And then you build an entire government around the idea that your relationship, that the role of government is to secure property, and property is your relationship between yourself and stuff. You have no idea how to think of the political and social solution to what the coronavirus is doing to America. However, if you understand that the government exists to secure relationships of freedom, one of which is property, another of which is employment through a market society, another of which is like our family relations, then you kind of understand that COVID-19 screws up all of those relationships, even if it gives us the semblance of private property. Right? So what is a politically robust COVID-19 response? Right? A politically robust COVID-19 response is going to see all of the institutions, all of the institutional relationships the disease kind of precludes. Right? Let's say that I believe in self-determination. Let's say I wanted to work hard, determine myself in order to score a touchdown. Right? The problem is there's no football game around and everyone plays baseball. I cannot score a touchdown in baseball. That's an institutional problem. So I cannot determine myself as someone who scores a touchdown because there's no institution that enables me to score a touchdown. Only, a strikeout or a home run, but no touchdowns. And I want to determine myself as a touchdown scorer. What you have to understand is that all of the determinations you can make of yourself are rationally limited by the identity that is determined politically, right? So the identity that that our politics allows in this baseball world is as a baseball player. Until I can get enough governing power to install or institute football as a game among the populace, I cannot be a touchdown scorer. Right? So for me to be free to determine myself as a thing, as a football player who scores a touchdown, I need to have enough power in government to install football as a thing. Right? And this comes, I would like to actually do an interview with someone who trained for the 1980 Olympics. I bet you that's fascinating stories because this is the Olympics. So you only get one, maybe two of them when you're in your peak physical condition. And I'm sure some people were in their peak physical condition because of the 1980, in 1980, but then it wasn't a politically viable Olympics because Jimmy Carter pulled us out because we were fighting the Cold War. And so, but what does that mean that they weren't able to determine themselves as an Olympian, even though they'd done all that work and trained? So what does that mean for their freedom? What does that mean for their self-determination? What it means is that their self-determination was always dependent upon a kind of institutional politics. It was just taken for granted. It was always contingent and contested within an institutional politics. We just thought, at the time, it would be a safe bet. And so since freedom and self-determination is a matter of being able to make plans and enact plans, we need to think of all of the institutions that go into our ability to make plans and enact plans in the world. And our government's role in stabilizing those institutions that may allow us to make plans and enact plans in the world. And some of those plans concern property. But like a lot of plans do not concern property. Right? The people in 1980 needed the government to secure their ability to compete in the Olympics. That had very little to do with a private property claim and more to do with other forms of freedom. Right? So I've given a handful of videos. There's one I did on legal care, how you can't really have a nation of laws, but only have a certain population that has access to appropriate legal support. Because really, then the population that has access to appropriate legal support uses that appropriate legal support to kind of colonize or predate, serve as predators to everyone who doesn't have legal support. So if we're serious about actually securing rights and living in a nation of rights, we need to secure everyone the ability to press those rights claims, and not just property rights claims, all of their rights claims that include property rights, but also include employment rights, because we live in a nation of employees now. And spousal rights. The founders, they organized a nation with the assumption that everyone who mattered was going to be self-employed, and that spouses and black people don't matter, spouses and slaves don't matter. And so we have all of these other kinds of rights that don't have really anything to do with property, because the founders were just overwhelmed with the notion that everyone would be self-employed and have their livelihood be determined by their property. Because you have to remember that America at the time was an infinite amount of land. You had a functionally infinite amount of land. All you had to do was go off and kill a few Native Americans to be willing to do that, and you got property. And from that property, you got tools or whatever, you could make your way in the world. So the idea was that everyone would get property and everyone would have tools. Everyone would get property and everyone would be able to make their way as self-employed people through their property. And if you had that, you really didn't, that was a productive nation. We didn't get industrialized until after we founded the nation in 1793, was the first cotton gin. So that kind of industry started popping up, and everyone couldn't be self-employed, and it became just too inefficient to assume that everyone's going to be self-employed. And so we have factories now, and factories make more things, and factories are wonderful, but factories also take employees, and employees, we need to actually understand. My kid is having some sort of way upstairs. Factories take employees, but if you have employees, that means you could produce more, but it also means you could wipe out all of the competition who are trying to compete with you with their own family business, right? So we have an industrial democracy that depends on employees that have wiped away a lot of entrepreneurs who are employee-less. And this is kind of a good thing because we can produce more things, but we need a political economy that deals with employee rights, not just private property rights. And that means we need to understand that property isn't a relationship between a person and their stuff. It's a relationship between a person and other people who would take your stuff. All right, so I just gave a lot of wisdom. I'll try to boil it down in the last minute and a half. We have a distorted notion of property. We think property is a relationship between a person and their stuff. We get this distorted notion from John Locke, a little bit of Hobbes. But mostly we get that distorted notion of property from John Locke. We get a distorted notion of government from Hobbes. Hobbes thinks government exists to secure your person and your property, and it doesn't matter whether you participate in government or not. He actually doesn't want you to participate in government. He thinks monarchies are just cleaner. Less conflict, less messy, right? So we need to understand, we need to move from Locke's notion of property as being a relationship between yourself and the stuff you've worked on, and understand that property is a relationship between yourself and other people who would recognize it, and then move from Hobbes' notion that government just secures person and property to understand that government secures institutions of freedom, which include the ability to participate in designing the government, right? So because if government's supposed to enable self-determination, I need a say in the kinds of things I can be. And for example, if I can If I would like to be someone who scores a touchdown, I need the government to install leagues, football leagues, or like at least enable me to play football in some sort of way, right? It can't ban, cut grass in pigskins. Right? So right now the coronavirus has kind of distorted all of these non-property institutions, and we don't know how to think about how it's distorted our capacity for freedom. It's because we have a notion of freedom that's tied to property, and a notion of property that's tied to like my relationship with stuff, not my relationship with other people. Recognition. Right, so once we move to that notion of property that's tied to my relationship with other people through mutual recognition, it's mine because you recognize it as mine. Then we could talk about other relationships of recognition that kind of allow our institutional lives to happen. For example, if I'm playing soccer, one of the institutions of recognition is that I can't pick up the ball when it's convenient for me to pick up the ball just because I really want to. Not because the ball is my property, but because of the institutional relationship I have with all of the other soccer players that we've all agreed that for us to play soccer, that means we've kind of forsworn the right or the ability to pick up the ball. We've all agreed that that is what it is to be a soccer player. And if any of us are going to be soccer players, I need everybody else to behave, to act purposefully and intentionally in a way that doesn't forswear their capacity to pick up the ball. Right? And that's not about private property, that's about institutional relationships. But those institutional relationships are interactive. So freedom is a matter of interacting with other people and structuring interactions. COVID-19 wipes away those interactions. We need to bring those interactions back or figure out a way to allow people to be free by restructuring the interactions. We can't get rid of we can't have a freedom without interactions with other free people, but we need to restructure and provide the enabling conditions for those interactions if a government is supposed to actually secure our freedom. So a government securing our freedom is going to look like in the age of COVID-19, making sure everyone has access to information. That means everyone, you can't be a democracy in the age of COVID-19 without everybody having access to like the internet or some sort of cable. Actually, I would think the internet because cable news is captured by corporate powers. You just can't have a fully functioning democracy because right now we had that was taken care of before by people having library access, right? I was like, well, as a matter of democracy, to have a robust democracy, people need access to information, so we need to have public libraries. But those people still, we haven't kind of canceled democracy. We've just privatized it and as we shelter in place. But that means in place, people need access to information as if they still had the libraries open. So we need to start thinking about enabling conditions of freedom this way and for both the pandemic, but also after the pandemic. And I hope one of the perks of COVID-19 has kind of degraded or depreciated the seriousness with which we take property and private property's monopoly on our governmental thinking. Government does a lot more than secure private property. We're seeing that because right now private property is fine, everything else is. And that is a huge problem for our self-determination. So I hope this has been helpful. Share it with your friends. Peace.